You are at home. I am Vermonte Bryant. Tonight, as the civil liberties of African Americans are plagued and threatened by COVID 19, police brutality, excessive use of force, and unprecedented election suppression across the nation, the National Bar Association is at the helm of legal matters addressing those issues. Tonight, we chat with the newly elected president of the National Bar Association about her plans to continue the fight to ensure equal treatment under the law for Black people. So joining us tonight is Tricia C.K. Hoffler, president of the National Bar Association. C.K., thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. Good evening. How are you?
I am good. I've survived Tropical Storm I've been pronouncing it so much I forgot. If I don't see it in front of me, I can't pronounce it. But the tropical storm that starts with an I. But we're good here in the DMV area. How about you? You're in Atlanta, right?
In Atlanta, and yesterday we got a little bit of the storm. Our power was out just very briefly, but we're fine and safe. So no, this is a lot because it's a bad tropical storm.
Yeah, but hopefully folks are safe. We had a couple deaths here in this area, but hopefully it'll make its way out into the Atlantic. But I think it's moving up the East Coast. But let's focus on the National Bar Association. It's the oldest, as you know, and largest bar association for African American lawyers. You've got over 50 affiliate chapters in the U.S. and abroad. For folks who don't know a lot about your NBA, right? Tell us what it does to help people of color in terms of legal matters.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show and allowing me to talk about the National Bar, an organization that I love. I've been a member of since I graduated from law school. The National Bar Association represents the interests of roughly 66,000 African American lawyers, judges, legal scholars, and law students. So it's a huge organization. It's the largest and oldest predominantly African American bar association in the country, and absolutely in the world, actually, because when you think about it, we've got the largest number of Black lawyers anywhere. And so what is the National Bar about? The National Bar, during my administration, I was just sworn in last week, is focusing on 3 pandemics. You talked about them in your introduction, but in my way of looking at the world, there are 3 pandemics. There's COVID-19, there's election suppression, and there's police brutality. And so why are those 3 areas at the top of my list? In fact, the entire focus of this year is because each of those areas really is disproportionately impacting the African American community and our membership. Let's just talk about COVID very briefly. Well, we know from statistics, and we can't always rely, frankly, from my standpoint, on the federal government to give us the accurate information. But what we do know for a fact is that COVID has and is disproportionately impacting Black folks, African Americans, and Black and brown people. This we know to be true for a fact. You can just look around you in our community and see that. So COVID is so important that we tackle this, and we have formed strategic alliances with the National Medical Association. Why the National Medical Association? Well, the National Medical Association represents the interests of over 45,000 African American doctors in this country. COVID is a healthcare crisis. It's a medical issue at its core. It is impacting our communities and destroying generations, but it is a healthcare crisis. So who better to team up with, to form a coalition with, than the National Medical Association? Those doctors, these fine doctors in this country, are on the front lines of this fight, risking their lives every day. Because you see, our Black doctors, like our Black lawyers, we represent those that other people don't want to. We treat those that other people don't really want to treat.
But I want to ask you this, though, because you use the word coalition, right? And you're giving an example of it. Is that all important, that the National Bar Association isn't standing alone, that it has to have coalitions to be as successful as it can be in legal matters and representing people of color?
Absolutely not. We don't have to build coalitions to be successful, but we do build coalitions because our interest in those 3 buckets is nationwide. If I talk about COVID, we built coalition groups with the National Medical Association Rainbow Push Coalition, we were part of a group that entered into this COVID manifesto. And the reason why that's important is because we can't rely on the traditional information sources on information for COVID, but we can rely on manifestos, doctors, lawyers, and groups of people who have the interests of our community at heart. Because part of fighting COVID, I always tell people I'm running for COVID. I don't want to get by COVID. But part of that is information and education in our community, making sure that we have access to the right information. And so the coalition building is just so that we have a wider breeze, that our reach is much broader. But make no mistake, on legal issues, legal questions, the National Bar Association is already front center. When we turn to the second bucket and priority of my administration, it's police brutality and reform. Well, certainly we stand in solidarity with the Congressional Black Caucus and with other organizations, like-minded organizations that are for police change, policing reforms. But just so that we're clear, all of those African-American lawyers that are leading the charge and that are representing the families of Breonna Taylor, of George Floyd, of Rashad Brooks, Ahmaud Arbery, and on and on and on are National Bar Association lawyers. Let me be very clear. Let's talk about Ben Crump. Ben Crump is a past president of the National Bar Association. He's not just Ben Crump, a lawyer, an African American. He's a past president of the National Bar Association.
And tell folks who may not know Ben Crump but have seen his face, right? Who he is in the present in terms of his work.
Absolutely. Ben Crump, you may have seen him. He's the African American lawyer who first surfaced where people in mainstream media saw him representing the family of Trayvon Martin.
Correct.
Ben Crump. He's from Florida. He's a phenomenal lawyer. I've known Ben Crump for at least a couple of decades. But he's the past president of the National Bar. He got his training in many respects. When we talk about what the National Bar represents for us, he got that at the National Bar. He was a leader in the National Bar. You see Ben Crump on television now because he is always at the forefront of many fights, many struggles. He's a household name in some instances. He's a phenomenal lawyer, and he's a National Bar Association leader. Daryl Parks, one of Ben Crump's he's Ben Crump's former partner. He also is a leader. He's a past president of the National Bar Association. Again, when you see him on TV, when you see Ben Crump on TV, when you see Chris Stewart went to Howard University School of Law. Chris Stewart is a past president of one of our affiliate chapters, the Gate City Bar here in Atlanta, another leader at the National Bar. He was actually one of my proteges, so I call him one of my children in the law. Chris Stewart, phenomenal lawyer, phenomenal. We all trained, when I say Chris Stewart, not under Willie Gary. Willie Gary, Willie Gary is one of the baddest and toughest trial lawyers of all times. National Bar. I think Mr. Gary has not missed a National Bar meeting in maybe 40 years. You see Breonna Taylor's attorney, Lonita Baker. She's a vice president of the National Bar. You see Lee Merritt. Lee Merritt probably now represents more families than any Black lawyer that we see on television. Lee Merritt is a National Bar Association member, and I could go on and on and on and on.
Because it sounds like the tradition, we know the tradition of the National Bar Association is prominent. We know, like in many instances, organizations that serve predominantly African-American lawyers, whatever group it is, has to be formed because at some point, right, those lawyers were not brought into the mainstream organizations. But I want to ask you this, if I can, CK.
Yes.
Recently in Ferguson, the prosecutor there did not bring charges against the white officer who shot and killed Michael Brown. We know that to be a fact. And that local prosecutor was African American, right? Yes. But said, listen, the evidence is just not there to bring the charges that many felt were warranted. Talk about the position African-American lawyers, prosecutors oftentimes may be put in when you have an issue like in Ferguson and folks think, okay, we're good now. We've got an African-American prosecutor. We know that they are going to bring justice to the death of Michael Brown and bring this man to justice. But then the law is the law. Is that a fine line often that Black lawyers have to walk, and sometimes are faced with when the African-American community is expecting one thing, but you have to still follow the law?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you have these shooting cases, you have the civil track, and you've got the criminal track. And the criminal track, that's a state, that's a prosecutor. That's where you see the prosecutors. And I say, thank God we do have Black prosecutors.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's my belief, in my opinion, that they do bring an additional level of justice, leveling the playing field. But sometimes the evidence, as much as it pains us, and again, I don't do criminal work. I've not been a prosecutor, so I'm going to defer to strong prosecutors. But sometimes I do know this, even in my civil practice, the evidence may not justify bringing some charges. That's a tough call.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've got the community pushing and saying, absolutely, we know you're going to bring charges because Stevie Wonder could see that there's an injustice here.
Right.
That may be true. There is an injustice. Police brutality has been going on for time immemorial. There's a lot of injustice. The question is, can you get a conviction?
Mm-hmm.
Can you have the evidence to be able to prosecute? And that's critical. So on some levels, we've got to defer to the prosecutors. Now, there are a whole bunch of prosecutors that we don't want to defer to. And I say that because I'm here in Georgia.
Oh, boy.
Yes. I mean, prosecutor here there didn't want to take the case, didn't want to look at the case, didn't want to arrest the police officers, didn't want to investigate because they were related to somebody's mama of the mama, grandma. You see, all of that is corruption.
Mm.
So when we see corruption, we want to hold their feet to the fire. Mm-hmm. But when you have prosecutors that are looking at the evidence, that believe in justice, believe in social justice and leveling the playing field, and are not afraid to hold law enforcement's feet to the fire, we've got to support and elevate those prosecutors, because they too believe in social justice, but they have to be governed by the law. They can't, just because they do us a great disservice if they get out there on a limb knowing good and well that the case will be dismissed. And then where are we? But thank God we do have a parallel track, which is a civil track, which is where you see many of us, where you see Ben Crump, Darryl Parks, many of the lawyers that are bringing cases against a department, against an individual. You see, that's where you can really get justice as well. So I say to the families that are very disappointed when they don't see prosecutors bringing charges, they've got to look at the evidence. They've got to, because at the end of the day, when you go before a jury, you can't be making up stuff. It has to be, right. I'm just saying, it's got to be based on the evidence.
Right.
And sometimes it's difficult from an emotional standpoint because you're fighting, like for me, I'm a plaintiff's lawyer. I'm fighting for my clients. But I got to be able to prove my case. I don't do criminal work. I defer to those that do. But I do know that sometimes there are tough decisions for our Black prosecutors because they too want justice. I can't speak for everyone, but I'm assuming that when you are looking at the evidence and bringing your case, you want justice. You want that win. You want a sense of holding people accountable if you file those charges. And there are many of them that do it successfully, and sometimes, unfortunately, some don't. They make that tough call.
Tricia C.K. Hoffler,
yes,
newly elected president of the National Bar Association. Great interview, great energy. If this is how you present in front of a jury or a judge, I want you as my lawyer. We thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations on your position. We look forward to maybe speaking with you more in the future, because as this election is coming up, voter suppression, and we could have obviously spent a whole show on that.
Good.
We may want to talk a little bit more about that. But thank you so much for joining us again, and congratulations on your well-deserved position.
Thank you. I am available to chat whenever. I love your show, and I love WHUR. I went to law school in D.C.
Hey,
WHUR. I remember Quiet Storm. I remember all that. That got me.
All right, and it's still there, so you can dial it up on Sirius XM.
I know.
Right. Thank you so much, and thank you all out there for joining us for this edition of HUR at Home. I am Bramante Bryant. Have a great night. We'll see you down the road.